cutting boards. So recently, I made a whole video on cutting board 101. The steps that go into making a big old chopping block style cutting board, all the steps that you would need for a cutting board. But more than just this one style, there's plenty of styles with cutting boards. And so this video, it's going to explore this triangular finger grip. So smaller boards, this is more of a cheese board. Maybe it could still work as a cutting board. It could be a charcuterie board, a bread board. But adding a triangle adds a little bit of interest as opposed to just the circle. I actually saw this idea in a Rockler catalog about a year ago. I'm like, oh, I want to pull that off. So instead of, batching out a bunch where you have to cut each individual one and sanding it, making a jig. Right, so just a simple jig that can pull off that triangle for repeatability using a flush trim bit. So this video I walk you through how to make a jig to batch out triangular grip cutting boards. So these are the steps, include some measurements if that's helpful to you. But again, if you're looking for all the steps for the cutting board, make sure you check out that cutting board 101 video. But here, let's check out how to make a jig for a triangular finger grip. All right, so obviously you need a jig to pull this off. So this is my first iteration. It's just some scrap wood. So you just need scrap plywood, just some flat stuff. Doesn't have to look pretty. I mean, obviously this doesn't look super pretty, but something to pull with your fingers. You got your triangle and then like a little fence. For this one, I'm gonna use some nicer stuff, but again, just any kind of scrap wood. So go ahead, lay down some measurements, make some drills, make some cuts, and we'll make the jig.
So I do recommend starting with some thicker stock, maybe about 3/4 inch plywood. This is some thinner stuff. I'll get more into that a little bit later. But I started with a 6" by 6" square, some scrap pieces to act as kind of the lip or a fence, if you will. And this is my first iteration of the jig. It doesn't have to look fancy. But then right here I marked off, these are where I marked my holes. So for my purposes, I did 1 1/8 inch and then 2.5 inches. You could convert to metric or however you want it to look. But this just gives you an idea of where you're gonna have the center of your holes. So you're gonna be drilling out these holes. So here I am, I'm marking off that 1 1/8 inch, and then I'm marking off 2.5 inches. So whatever that number is for you, you just mark it off with a pencil, and where those lines intersect, you want to use an awl, or I'm using my Duresta ice pick here. Just want to make sure that you have that dead center, so it just looks a little bit more locked in. And then once you have your holes, you're going to drill it. So I'm using a 1/2 inch drill bit here. You can use a Forstner bit or another drill bit, but you just want to make sure it has that point. You could use a cordless drill. You don't have to have a drill press. And so just go ahead and drill out those holes. Once you have those 3 holes drilled, you want to connect the dots. You want to kind of stretch that line just like so. So that kind of gives you an idea of what it's going to look like. But getting those 3 holes, that's where you really want to take your time with the measurements. For trimming out the inside, you want to use a jigsaw. You could use a scroll saw, but a jigsaw or a coping saw would work here as well. It's just be careful here, right? So this is your jig. You want to make this triangle needs to look awesome, so all your future triangles look awesome. If you feel really confident, just cut straight on that line. Otherwise, kind of sneak up, and you can work on sanding up to the line a little bit later. Down below, I just have two holes where I already marked it off, and I got my points. This is going to be where the fingers go. Again, this doesn't matter as much. This is just to have your hand safely back. So just kind of get a feel for where you want that to be. You could see on my first iteration earlier, it was just the messed up triangle that I started with. But you got your two points, and then just drill it out. I'm using a 1 inch drill bit here just for 2 circles on either end. Makes a smile, hello. And then just kind of connect those lines again. So once again, this is for the hand to hold the jig while you're at the router table to have your hand safely back. And so you can use the jigsaw again here. You don't have to be super careful or locked in here. This one doesn't matter as much.
All right, so once you have the holes drilled and you've done your jigsaw work, it's time to really refine that shape. The triangle especially, that's what matters. This little finger grip, you don't really care. Because this is going to get the flush trim bit, this needs to be perfect, or exactly what you want it to look like on your final product. So it's time to sand it. So I have a benchtop unit with the oscillating spindle. It's a great tool, and I can really refine it. You don't have to have one of these tools though. I know the Dremel is a great option. So this rotary tool, you have your little sanding drum, you can use that as well. This is under $25, so a lot more affordable. These do leave burn marks. However, you don't care if there's burn marks on your product. This isn't the final product. This is just the jig. So that's an option. You also have a pencil and sandpaper. You wrap it and you just, sand, or you can use dowels, right? So there's certainly other options, but at this point, before adding the fences, you do want to make sure that this looks exactly how you want it to look like. Maybe afterwards, trace it on paper and see, is that the shape you want? So really refine that triangle, and then you're good to go. So let's sand, refine that triangle.
So you do want to clean it up. You can clean it up with a spindle here and just working my way through, just making sure that that triangle looks great. Because again, whatever this triangle, whatever this shape looks like, that's what all of your future shapes will look like when you use the jig. So take your time here, just really refine that to the look that you want. For the handhold, it doesn't matter as much. Just want to make sure it's comfortable. All right, so attaching these fences or these stops on the side, you can use CA glue, but if you're going to use thin stock like I'm here, do not use just CA glue. You want to use wood glue. So I'll talk more about this in a little bit, but my first version was 3/4 inch, and this worked fine with CA glue. But if you're using thinner stock here, it's not quite strong enough. So again, we'll talk more about that in a second, but here you can see what it should look like, right? It's just going to be the lip where it can sit just so on the cutting board. And so take your cutting board and it just nests right in there. You can see how you're going to hold it. But then you want to take a pencil and you want to mark out on your board, where do you want the triangle to go? And so go ahead, place it on, mark it out, because you do need to remove some material before you actually use the jig. So, all right, that looks good. And then you do want to go ahead and drill out. So be really careful here. You want to not go up to the line, right? You can be really close, you can sneak up, and then, you are going to take out some of the material, most of it. Don't leave a ton of excess material in there, but don't go too far that you go over the line. So it doesn't have to look pretty here. Because the flush trim bit. So the flush trim bit on the right, the spiral one, is really what I recommend. It's just a lot nicer, cuts cleaner, it's a little bit safer. But here you can see there's a little bit more material in there, but it still does the trick. So you want to hold it down just so, and then just work your way over. Be really careful at the router table, taking your time, go nice and easy. If you really wanted to be extra safe, you could use some carpet tape. Underneath this, some double stick tape, that would work as well. But if you have a good jig that's strong and safe, you don't need that. Again, we'll talk more about that in a second, but that's real time right there. Just working your way around and then suck up all that sawdust and maybe do another pass if you need to. But then you pull it off and you're like, okay, that's pretty good. It's pretty clean. So if you take your time on that initial triangle, it really does look nice. A little bit of sanding left to do, but there you can see it. That's it in action with that flush trim bit. Again, I do recommend using a spiral flush trim bit. I'll leave a link down below about that.
All right, changing gears real quick, because I got to talk about safety. I just stopped working on it. You can still see my mask mark. Here's the deal. I've made a ton of these triangle grips with this jig. I wanted to make a new jig for the video. Ooh, this is pretty, but look what happened, right? So it's just being held by CA glue. Now, CA glue is amazing, right? It's incredible stuff. But you see how thin that is? All right, that's not a lot of material or surface area for it to adhere. And that is so much strain as you're pulling it. And if you really pull on it, it's just going to pop off. So it popped off for me. It was a little sketch. So please, 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 please be safe. Sometimes we get these ideas for how to batch something out, and so I don't have to go and cut each individual triangle hold. But if you're going to do this jig, which I still think you should, I still think you can totally do it safely, maybe go for the 3/4 inch plywood. Don't do, this, pretty little stuff that's like basically 3/8 of an inch. Go with the thicker stuff. And then sometimes what I do when I use CA glue, I'll actually add a little bit of wood glue. I'll have a bead of wood glue, and then I'll have CA on the sides, and maybe just wait. We're always in a rush to finish quickly, but you do want to make sure that this is not coming off. A good bit does make a big difference. Other part of the problem on this one right? I left a little bit too much room. Just because these amazing bits can take away material so easily doesn't mean you should put such a strain on the bit. So when you are, cutting in up to the line and such, do make sure that you get pretty close. Don't leave a lot of material there, especially if you're working with some harder stock, hard maple, oak, other things. That's going to make a difference. So again, I just wanted to stop and be real. We make mistakes, owning it, but I would hate for anyone to have a disaster where they injured themselves. So router is an incredible tool, but it is equally, if not more dangerous than the table saw. Respect your tools, take your time, but especially on something like this where you're going to put that much strain, maybe some wood glue in addition to the CA glue, and just make sure it's a really strong jig. All right, back to it, back to the boards, back to the triangle grips.
So here you can see it with that thicker stock. Again, I do recommend making it with some 3/4 inch. Again, it's the same idea here. If you're at all nervous, maybe add some carpet tape, but I have done it safely. But again, just respect the tool and be careful. After you've got it all down, you do want to add some edge profiles. So I like doing roundovers. It feels nice. You could do chamfers for a fully modern look, but the roundover just feels really nice. So that's what I go for. You can see what it looks like with the roundover, and pretty happy with it. So this is just a really cool look. It's different, it's unique, and so it adds some character to your board, a little bit of a modern feel. And here you can see just this small batch, right? Small batch of 5, and using this jig made it that much quicker to get 5 triangle finger grips as opposed to doing each and every one. And then of course, jumping ahead to adding some finish. Don't forget that Cutting Board 101 video if you need to see any extra steps on how to make a cutting board. But here's the jig, and there you have it.
All right, there you have it. Batching out triangular finger grips using a jig. So again, like I said in the video, try not make it with a thin stock. I did go back and use wood glue, but maybe add some fasteners. Just be safe with it. Any kind of work with a flush trim bit, you always want to be extra safe. I do have some other styles, right? So a charcuterie board, this is one in works, in progress. You can see some different handles. So there's plenty of possibilities for cutting boards, chopping boards, charcuterie boards. I do have a video about this. If you enjoyed this, if this was helpful to you, despite the big epic whoopsie daisy, safety first, please consider subscribing. We're going to do a lot more projects like this, all kinds of sawdust shenanigans. But for this video, I really hope that did help you if you wanted to pull off this look. To get that triangle, make a jig. Jigs are fun. They're an easy way for repeatability. Obviously, you could use a CNC, but not everyone has a CNC, and it's kind of fun to problem solve. So anyway, make a cutting board, get creative, and as always, have fun. Take care, everyone.